hope for the unknown is good. It is better than hatred of the familiar.
One of the things that struck me was that the film, people's sort of perceptions that I'd heard was like, oh, it's going to be quite, like depressing and sad and it's about sexual blah, blah, blah. And actually it was quite uplifting. I found the thing that I took away from it was that there's this sort of innate desire for freedom and autonomy and emancipation. And that was sort of what came through for me at the end. And from your point of view, is obviously, you know the end when you start the process. So how do you sort of chart your journey through this emancipation? Like that must have been a very intense sort of experience. What was that like, sort of working on that, I guess?
Well, we shot in sequence more or less, which is so amazing. I mean, I don't know how I would have done it if we hadn't.
Yeah.
And I think for this experience, I was actually really curious about I didn't know where I was going to go with my character, or where the story was going to take me. And actually, if anything, I didn't want to come in with a prejudgment. I was going to work every day with incredible actors and actresses, and I could just stand in front of somebody and in real time having my own, point of view from this character be changed in real time. So it wasn't. For me, there wasn't a map. There was just people, and that was the thing that kind of I did anyway.
No, I agree. I think that it was anything I've ever done, a very easy process to not preempt anything. And I think actually I always try and do that as a self-protection thing, and then I always end up never doing it and I let it all go. But with this, it was so easy, day to day. When we got into the swing of it, because we were doing it chronologically, just turning up and going, okay, well, and quite terrifying and quite scary, because you were very vulnerable actually about what was going to happen. But there was something really amazing about it was taking you somewhere and you weren't in charge of where it was going. And I hope that's a sort of similar thing to what the audience hopefully go through on it. That it's continually surprising.
Yeah.
You say, I love the fact that it's really interesting that people because it's about sexual abuse, that somehow it has to be serious and, all the time.
Right.
And these women love laughing and somehow have an ability to still love life, and it just shows the humanity. You can't make a film like this without the humanity and humour and hope and all those things. So,
and there's the element of, there's a point where they say, oh, I think they laugh, the girl who's narrating is like, I think they laugh to the way that they would cry. But there's also, there's that, and there's also real humor in it too. So there's sort of those both of those things. And behind the scenes, obviously, Sarah mentioned that you had a therapist on set to sort of help process, and there was a lot of safeguarding in place. But were there moments where I can only imagine that it's still, the sillies can happen, right? So were there moments where you sort of were like, I'm laughing and I'm actually not supposed to be laughing this time?
Oh, all the time.
all the time. That moment when Sheila did that thing, what was it that Sheila did where she said the line?
Oh, Sheila, I think Sarah had given her a note or something, and Sheila was like, yes, of course, Sarah. And then all she was thinking about in that take was it's coming up, it's coming up, it's coming up. And then she just, way before her line had arrived, stood up and just kind of declaimed it. And we were all like,
basically
what? Hello?
Said the note.
Who are you?
That was great.
Yeah.
But it was never, I don't think it was very clear when there were moments of intensity on set.
Yeah. But we all were kind of respectful of, I think, because we had to go to certain places, we also knew that we had to respect that was where that was could happen, and nobody ever discussed it. Nobody ever talked, we went back to the green room, we talked about life and what we're going to eat that night, and should we go for a glass of wine this weekend? It was just there was no room to kind of dissect anything, and I think because we respect and are inspired so much by the people we were working with, it was kind of sacred that everything that happened in the hayloft stayed in the hayloft.
Everything.
Right. The silliness and the sadness.
Yes. There's this innate yearning for freedom in these women, and that it's not, because someone was like, oh, it must be very depressing. I was like, but it's not depressing. It's actually uplifting, right? Because it's about the fight for freedom and emancipation. And so, obviously, different roles within the film, but approaching that subject, how did you sort of play with the different petals to not fall into a sort of like maudlin moroseness, I guess.
Sure. I mean, I think ultimately what the film is about is moving forward and making things better and working as a community to figure out what the way forward is. And so it's this group of people who have very different points of view having to come together and work together. And so in a way, for me, the whole premise of the film was hopeful, and it was really important to have laughter and releases. I think that films, for me, are never that effective if I leave them so depressed I can't move.
Right.
And so I think that the idea with this film always was that it would be a provocation to a conversation and to ideas of ways forward, as opposed to just examining the horrors and the harms done.
Right. And now, obviously, Ben, you're sort of, in a way, I found like your character's almost a lens, because both we as a viewer and you as the only man in the room are the sort of interlopers in the experience. So how did you sort of bring that? Because obviously there's an intimacy in your relationship to these women, particularly with Ona, but also
a distance.
Yeah.
Yeah. A separateness.
Yeah,
It's not his experience. He shouldn't really be there. Some people don't want him there. Yeah, that was all part of the sort of dynamics that we were playing with. And
was it hard to keep
story.
that distance?
Sometimes, yeah, sometimes. Sometimes it was difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Sorry,
go
go
on.
ahead.
No, yeah, interesting question. Yeah.
Because I also feel like it plays with humor. There's a lot of laughter in the film, and yes, there's this like laugh so you're not crying, but there is humor too, just genuine humor, and I think that helps the ebb and flow of the film. Were there moments where you were sort of transported by those feelings? Because I can't imagine how powerful it must have been to be in the room when these conversations, because even though they're fiction, they're real in the sense that they are real, you know. So was that, I don't know, what was that experience like?
It's really interesting. I feel like one of the youngest actresses, Kate, she did get very upset at certain moments. I think because of being there, but also because of what was being discussed. I think as older people, you get better at having some distance between, and maybe you process it privately alone. But so, yeah, we were quite focused, and it was about the work. It wasn't about us so much. Would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think we also had some guardrails in place. So we had a therapist on set when we were having the harder scenes, and crew and cast would go and talk to her sometimes. We knew we could always take a break if anybody got overwhelmed. So I think it created a sense where things weren't getting bottled up and exploding. I think we all had days that were harder than others.
Sure.
But in general, yeah, I think there was also so much laughter on set, and that was so important for us to find the humor, both in the working environment but also in the film.
I think actually your character has one of the not most interesting, but interesting lines where you say something like, "It's not just the men who have learned," and there's that moment where you realize, how much the women have been influenced by the rules that have been set up, and that dichotomy. And that to me is one of the most interesting parts of the film, is that it is just about all these different women reacting differently to the same kind of similar set of circumstances. And I was wondering, when you come up to a line like that where you know that there's layers to it for an audience to take away, does that get in your own head sometimes, or are you able to just kind of be in the moment?
No, it makes me nervous now. Shit. I had no idea what I was doing.
It was great. It was really good. Don't worry.
No, I don't like thinking about those things too much. I like to get out of my way at all costs.
Right.
And I mean, like, it was super interesting because, like, a lot of these things that we were talking about and that each of the women were talking about from different perspectives were things that I had thought about but never really had found a way to articulate or at least say out loud. And in some ways, everything that everybody says in that film rings true, you know, and we could all stand at different points of view. And I think that was something that I definitely learned, was actually there's so much that I have learned that I have to unlearn so that I can try and move forward. And it's not, you know, we're in relationship relationships with each other as men and women, and as women and women, and as men and men. And actually, this isn't about divisiveness. This is actually about an education that we've all inherited. And unless we actually start having these conversations, constructively and not aggressively, then that's when change will really happen. And I guess acknowledging those moments of going, actually, it's not just the men that have put us in this position, but it's a legacy of stuff that as women we've passed down to each other.
Right.
And actually we have so much to unravel within ourselves before we can start unraveling something much bigger in the world.
Yeah. Obviously, there's a lot of conversations on awards and reactions to films and stuff like that. And I was wondering, from your perspective, did you feel that the outcome of sort of the Academy Awards and BAFTAs and everything was in line with your expectations in terms of the way movies about women, particularly women talking, might be perceived by the audience?
I had zero expectations, which is a really great place to start for anything in life. I highly recommend it. You don't get disappointed, you get pleasantly surprised occasionally. So I'm thrilled that, I'm thrilled that the film was recognized in this way. I think I'm personally quite sad to not see Saint Omer or Till or The Woman King recognized in any way, though the BAFTAs did a better job with that with The Woman King. So, that would be for me the thing that stands out to me right now, in terms of it just being an incredibly great year for Black female filmmakers. But no, I mean, I had zero expectations, and we are all really honored and thrilled that that the film, because it means something, and it does mean the film has more of a life.
Right.
For sure.
You mentioned The Woman King briefly. That there's such an adrenaline to that movie. When I saw it, I was just like, it's like
it's
a
amazing.
roller coaster.
Yeah.
I mean, it's brilliant. Yeah, it is brilliant.
Yeah.
But I was wondering, obviously, with this one, it doesn't have that sort of action impetus until the very end. How did you work on keeping the energy sort of punchy throughout? Because it doesn't lag, which is an interesting kind of dichotomy. So as a director and then as an actor within that sphere. How did you do that?
I mean, I knew the film had to have an engine, and I knew that it had to come in around under 100 minutes. I knew it wouldn't survive being a longer film. And it was a constant process of whittling down the script to its essentials, and then in the editing room being ruthless.
Right.
And pace became really important to us to just make sure that I wanted to experience it the way I experienced the book, which was that I read it fast, I inhaled it, and it went through me like a bullet. So that's what we were aiming for.
Right. As an actor, do you feel that when you're working on it? Does it feel that kind of momentum?
It was really interesting because Sarah was always like, no, take your time. And that was, that it could exist in something that wasn't necessarily quite real. But then I think that lots happened in this, the way it's been pieced together. But we were always given lots of space, time, a safe space to be in.
But there's a moment that I remember really well. It was like the second huge scene. We were going to run the lines, and you said, why don't we just run them as fast as possible just while we're getting it? And we suddenly found the pace of the scene, which for me as a filmmaker, that wasn't a natural pace to find.
Right.
But it opened up for me a world of, oh, wow, it actually works at that pace. We can do it that fast.
Oh, that's true, yeah.
Remember that? You were like, wow.
We probably did experiment with things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool.